surrounded by the khakis and mints. We move.
Okay, welcome back to a very special episode of Ratchet and Clank, Up Your Arsenal developer commentary. I am Tony Garcia.
And I'm Mike Stout. And I just want to note that I'm not making fun of the way you introduced the show, Tony.
That's because I did it well. That's why you're not making fun of it.
All right, but what are we doing here?
Well, this one is going to be a very interesting episode just because just this last weekend, we put up a video where we basically just gave our thoughts on the state of the industry in general, where we thought things were going, and, just talking about our feelings about what it's like to be working in games right now.
Right.
And the response was pretty overwhelming, I have to say. I think we got more comments in the first 24 hours than we'd ever gotten on anything else that we posted.
That's fair to say, yeah. It's a lot of people really curious about a lot of different things.
Yeah, I mean, there were a lot of questions. Like, more questions than I think I've seen on any of our videos so far. And I was personally really astounded that the questions all seem to be very well-reasoned, rational questions, which on the internet I'm not very used to.
Yeah, I was actually pretty grateful for that.
Yeah, I was really impressed, and I was really impressed with the people that were taking the time to comment on our videos and ask us these questions that I thought were valid questions to a lot of things that we had said. And I felt that we owed them an explanation for saying the things that we had said. Because I think we did leave a lot of things hanging. And just so people know, there were some things that we actually cut out of that video. Just because looking back on it, I personally wasn't comfortable with some of the things that I said. So we cut it out. But we're going to try to go into a little bit more depth about the things that we were talking about. And really just answer the questions that people asked. And the reason we're doing this now is because we actually have, I think, 3-4 episodes in the can already, Mike?
I think so. There's at least that many, yeah.
So if we didn't just sort of put this one episode in here out of order, it would be about 3 to 4 weeks before we would actually get around to answering these questions. And we felt that was a little bit disrespectful to people that actually took the time to watch our videos and ask us these questions. So we wanted to get to it a little bit more quickly.
And some of these we've answered, but we think that it would be pretty good for everybody here, so we're just going to go over them.
Yeah. So we're going to have going on in the background, Mike's just going to be going around farming sewer crystals. It's really not going to be relevant to what we're talking about, I don't think.
It's entirely possible that we'll stumble across something really important.
Right. Well, I mean, if something bad happens, I might just be ashamed and call it out. But I'm going to try to not let that happen, and we're just going to try to stay on point.
Because
everyone get through these questions.
Everyone needs to remember, Tony, that you coded this level.
That's right. I did.
This is very important to this.
I had a very heavy hand in a lot of the stuff that went on in this level. So anything that goes wrong in the background, it's probably my fault. And if I don't acknowledge it, it's not that I didn't see it. It's just that I'm trying to stay on point. So we're just going to get started. We're just going to go in at the top. This comes from Mr. Fraser Films 2009. I have a question. What do you guys think about publishers in general? Very general question. Mike, what do you think about publishers in general?
It says also, unless rule number 1 also applies to publishers, then you don't have to answer.
Yeah, I figured I'd leave that out,
but
just to put you on the hot spot.
Well, you're not really putting me on the hot spot. I mean, I work for a publisher, so like I think they're great because they employ me. But to a certain extent, they employ everybody in the games industry. I mean, like not independent games have sort of their own thing, and there's other funding models. But as far as if you want to make a game, what do? It's still the dominant model.
For sure.
And I think a lot of times, like what you read about in the news, as far as what publishers are and what they contribute to the industry, isn't really that accurate. Like in general, what happens is a publisher wants to make a game. They find a developer and they say, will you make this game? How much money can you make this game for? And then they make it, right? It's sort of like contract work, right? Or being a wedding photographer. It's hard for me to understand when people say that they're super smothering and stuff. I mean, even when we were working with Sony, that wasn't so much the case.
Just like everything else, you got to take some good with the bad, and publishers as of right now, serve a very important purpose that you're not going to get anywhere else. Funding expensive video games. All your Assassin's Creeds, your Calls of Duty, your Halos,
Your Marios and Zeldas?
right? Those would not exist at this point in time outside of the traditional publisher model because they're too expensive, and there's not a lot of people out there that are willing to fund them. Maybe that will change, but as of right now, they serve a very important purpose. Sometimes there's bad things, but that just comes. That's just part of the package that you have to deal with.
Yeah, I mean, if you were to ask us about publishers in specific, I'm sure we'd have things to say. But publishers in general, I mean, that's
right.
Like it's like asking what you think about movie studios in general if you work in the movie industry.
Exactly. I think you got it as succinct as we can possibly say it. All right. Let's just move on to the next one, and this one might be better for you because you have a little bit more experience in this than I do. Can you do stuff on pitching ideas to game companies? I know that there's lots of different sectors, and the writing staff, which is my point of interest, probably are as important as the developers, but I'm just curious as to what it takes to get signed on to a team. That's two different questions. I think we covered sort of getting into the game industry in the other episode, so let's just focus on the first part of this question. And let's do stuff on pitching stuff to game companies, Mike.
Nobody pitches anything to game companies.
What do you mean nobody pitches anything to game companies?
Well, okay, if you work at a game company, you get to pitch things, right? But if you don't, nobody comes up and knocks on Ubisoft's door and says, "I've got an idea for a $1 billion seller, and when you hear this, you're going to want to pay me a bunch of money." Like that never happens. That has never happened. What does happen is you've already got a job at a game developer, or you are a game developer studio, and you're pitching your idea to whoever's going to give you the money.
Right.
So those two situations do exist, but the idea of pitching a game as a way of getting onto a team, it doesn't actually work that way in the game industry.
This is a bold statement, but I'm going to say it. Nobody will ever get a job at a game studio because you have a great idea for a video.
No, everybody has a million great ideas for video games. It's never going to be valuable enough. What people will buy from you is your execution.
Yes, indeed. So, in terms of pitching ideas, it's all about being on the game studio, climbing the ladder, getting high enough on the totem pole to where people around you are interested in maybe pitching together to come up with an idea, and then pitching that idea to publishers. And even then, it's never going to be your idea. It will be the team's idea.
Right.
So, this is going to sound very cruel, but you will never make your game.
I think that's fair.
It will always be a collaborative process, and that's how games are made.
Assuming that you're not making the game by yourself, yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
indeed. Let's just move on to the next one. I think we've significantly shattered Super Mumble 360's dreams.
I think there was one more question in there, though. There was a bit, it sounded like he was interested in writing.
Yes.
And I think at least we could talk a bit about what the role of writing and writers is in a game, since he sounds like he's interested in... I work with writers as a designer. I don't write myself, but I've worked with a fair few. And generally speaking, they're people who already worked at the company, and they are good at writing, so they became the writer, right? Or they needed a writer. They say, hey, we want a guy who's done games before, or we want a gal who's done movies before. Like, you know what I mean? Like, they're usually looking for something like that, so cross-experience can help. But generally speaking, at this point, like, the writer's a guy on the team a lot of time. Like, and it depends on what studio you're at. I mean, Double Fine probably does story a lot differently than Insomniac did, right?
Yes. Well, Double Fine's also an interesting situation because our writer is Tim Schafer.
Right.
So, I mean, you have that's a hurdle to climb to become a writer at Double Fine.
Because you have to outright Tim Schafer, is that why?
Right, exactly.
You would be hard-pressed to find a better games writer, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't really have much more than that.
Okay, I mean, that's a fine... Again, I think we've done enough to make Super Mimbles be very sad about entering the games industry.
All right.
Again, just a really quick thing. We're about at the midway point. We're not trying to be negative. We're just trying to be sort of realistic about our answers. Like, we want to be honest. And a lot of times being honest is not very cool.
The industry itself is not super glamorous. Like, it's real. It's a real thing that involves working with real people.
Right.
And a lot of times the answers are less satisfying than you'd want from a narrative standpoint.
Right. So if we're coming off as negative, like, we certainly don't mean to be, but we feel like it's more important to be honest about what we think rather than trying to sugarcoat it and sort of, yeah. I think that's just generally what we're getting at. Here's another one from Dread Ale. I'm one of 3 guys trying to make a commercial mid-range title in Unity 3D. From what you discussed during this episode, it seems like you don't think this is very viable right now, and I was wondering if you could elaborate.
So I responded to that one. Do you want to talk about sort of what you think first?
Well, what I think, when you say you are 3 guys making a title in Unity 3D, that's not a mid-range game, that's an indie game. It's an indie game.
Right.
Mid-range game, that's not what we were talking about when we said mid-range games.
Right.
We were talking about like 30 people, not 3 people.
Yeah, we're talking about a few, like $2 to $5 million.
Right, exactly. So if you're under $2 million budget, that's not what we were referring to. And indie games, there is 100% a market for indie games. If you can go out there and you can execute and you can put it out there, there is certainly money to be made, and it is certainly viable.
Hell yeah.
It's really just about that execution and sort of sticking with it and getting it done. That's my opinion on the subject. So
what we're talking about is that mid-ranged games that cost, somewhere in the $2 to $10 million range, can just at this point can't make that amount of money back anymore. You got to be a game that's all or nothing at this point in order to make your money back. I mean, just last year, the 90% of the money in the industry was made by the top 10 games that came out.
Yeah.
That's not just a made up thing. I mean, that's what people bought last year, right?
Exactly.
So it's
that's just reality of the situation.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just the way it is. Maybe we don't like it. Maybe we do like it. It's just the way things are, and we have to live in that reality.
Aw, Tony. Now it sounds like a bummer.
Well, I don't mean it to be a bummer, but what I'm saying is that if you want to make an indie game, like, there's definitely a market for you there.
Yeah, go for it.
You can definitely go for it, and make it happen. And all it really comes down to is being able to execute on your idea well, stick with it, and put it out there, and just sort of see what happens. So yeah, we weren't talking about you, Dread Ale. We think you should keep on doing what you're doing, and I'm sure it's a fine game.
And if you want any feedback on it, send it to Tony.
That's right. I'll give you feedback.
Tony will totally be like, here's how you code the shit out of this thing.
So let's go to Joe Luber. What do you both think of schools with degrees designed specifically for working in the games industry? Many schools have outstanding track records of student projects. See DigiPen, but I would love to hear your take on how they prepare students for work in the industry.
Do you have anything to say on this? I've hired quite a few designers from.
Yeah, I mean, here's what I'll say. I worked with a couple people, a couple really standout people who came from places like DigiPen and
yeah.
other people. A few
like
other places.
Ryan Juckett came out of DigiPen.
Like Ryan Juckett, and I was going to use him as an example because when I think about Ryan, it doesn't matter what school Ryan went to, he would be great at his job regardless.
It's because he's amazing.
Yeah, for sure. I think Ivan also went to
right.
Full Sail or DigiPen, one of those two. Jared, who we worked with, went to
right.
Full Sail,
Drew Murray, the designer at he's one of the creative directors at Insomniac right now. He went to
these are all great
Guildhall.
developers, but I truly believe that these people would have been great game developers had they gone to any other university. It doesn't matter what university you went to. If you have it in you to make great games and you dedicate yourself to really learning how to make games properly, you will be good at it. That's my opinion.
I do think they have that I do think that people who have an education have an edge in that they have a foot in the door. That's the main place that I think, like, it also helps that you're familiar with the tools of the trade and generally how a production goes and stuff. But generally speaking, if you're coming out of the programs, the people in the industry are assuming they're going to have to retrain you. Like, that's just sort of how it is. They're when they hire you, they're budgeting a certain amount of time to train you how to do your job, regardless of where you went. That will not change, right? No one's going to hire you and think you're a superstar, except maybe Valve. And so far, that's like 8 people. So probably not, right? For the most part, and even probably if you get hired at Valve, there's a lot of mentoring that goes on, So the main thing I would say is that it definitely prepares you in the same way that college prepares you in any program, right? It shows you what you need to do and helps you build the skills that you need and helps you look really good on paper so that you can get that interview, so that you can show you're awesome, so that you can work really hard, learn your craft, and someday be a superstar. Maybe even be a superstar right out the bat. I mean, that I've seen that happen a lot of times, and I have seen that happen a lot with people who've been in these programs. So,
yeah. So I mean, I think for sure, and the programs are certainly legitimate. They're respected as much as any other degree. Definitely not thought of less. If in some cases thought of more.
I'm not going to talk shit about any particular program, no matter how much anyone asks me. But there are, like, do your research, do your due diligence before you find a program. Make sure that what they're claiming that they can do is real, and make sure that what they're teaching is actually getting people jobs. Like, you don't, like, it's entirely possible to be defrauded, just like it is with any college that you're looking into. Make sure you do your homework. Don't just listen to their promises. Just be smart about it the way you'd be smart about anything you were going to spend tens of thousands of dollars on.
Yeah, fair point. But yeah, in terms of sort of DigiPen Full Sail, if you're worried that they're a waste of money, they're not. But just like everything else, you get out what you put in. It's not an automatic job just because you went to DigiPen or Full Sail.
And if you can't draw, DigiPen is not going to make you a 3D modeler of the highest caliber overnight. You know what I mean? Like, you have to come into it with some passion or talent or knowledge, or you're going to have to put into it as much as you get out.
Yes, absolutely. So for Ratchet and Clank, up your arsenal. All right, hold on.
It's hard, isn't it, motherfucker?
It's getting late. For Ratchet and Clank, up your arsenal. Wow, I'm really screwing this up. For Ratchet and Clank, up your arsenal. Developer commentary. Very special episode. I am Tony Garcia.
And I am so fucking happy. I'm Mike Stout.
And we will see you next time.
Yes! God damn, my GarageBand is like stalling out right now. This track is so long.